The most opulent ballroom money can buy, the Grand Astoria in New York City. Crystal chandeliers drip light onto hundreds of guests in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. It is the wedding of the year, a merger of two powerful families, and every single detail has been planned to perfection. But perfection is a fragile thing. In just a few moments, the mother of the bride will make a fatal mistake. She will publicly humiliate a seemingly insignificant waitress, with no idea that this young woman holds not only the fate of her family, but her own in the palm of her hand. The mother of the bride, Eleanor Caldwell, moved through the ballroom like a general surveying her troops. Her smile was as tight as her custom-made dress, her eyes scanning every plate, every napkin, every face for the slightest imperfection. Today her daughter, Olivia, was marrying into another dynasty, and for Eleanor, this event wasn't a celebration of love. It was a demonstration of status. Her family's reputation was on the line. Moving silently through this world of organized chaos was Anna. She was a young college student, paying her tuition by working events like this one. Her server's uniform was clean and pressed, but it couldn't hide the fact that she was from a different universe. Anna was efficient, quiet, and nearly invisible, exactly as she was expected to be. It's funny, the things you notice when you're invisible. You see the forced smiles, you hear the whispered gossip, and you realize how often the glittering facade is just there to hide the emptiness underneath. The ceremony was over, the speeches had been made, and now, during the main dinner course, Eleanor Caldwell's tension was at its peak. Every dish had to be perfect, every glass of wine served at the precise temperature. Anna was balancing a tray of water goblets, navigating a narrow path between tables crowded with the city's elite. Suddenly, a guest made a careless gesture, throwing his arm back to wave at a friend, and his elbow clipped the edge of Anna's tray. A single glass wobbled and fell. The water didn't splash a guest or even soil a tablecloth. It landed with a soft splash on the pristine marble floor, just inches from Eleanor Caldwell's designer heels. It was a minor accident, a harmless mishap that could have been cleaned up in 30 seconds. But for Eleanor, it wasn't an accident. It was an unforgivable flaw in her perfect production. She shot up from her seat, her face a mask of theatrical fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the ambient chatter. The tables around her fell silent. Every head turned in their direction. Anna froze, the tray still in her hand. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. It was an accident. I'll clean it up immediately." She was already bending down to retrieve the pieces of shattered glass. But Eleanor wasn't interested in a solution. She was interested in a spectacle. "An accident?" she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "Look around you. This is the most important day of my daughter's life. And you, with your clumsiness, think you can just ruin it? Where does this hotel find its staff? Do they just pick you up off the street?" The insult hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Anna straightened up, her face pale, but her posture was steady. "I assure you, ma'am, it won't happen again." "You're right, it won't happen again," Eleanor thundered. "Because you're fired. I want you out of my sight. Go find your manager and tell him that Eleanor Caldwell had you personally dismissed. People like you simply do not belong in a place like this." The words were like physical blows. The humiliation was public, brutal, and completely out of proportion. Tears stung Anna's eyes, but she blinked them back. She looked desperately toward the bride, Olivia, who looked mortified but quickly dropped her gaze to her plate, utterly silenced by her mother's rage. Her father, Robert Caldwell, cleared his throat uncomfortably but said nothing. In their world, sacrificing a nameless server was easier than confronting Eleanor. The entire ballroom was now watching. And just like that, the mask was off. This wasn't about a spilled glass of water anymore. It was a raw display of power, a moment of pure, undiluted cruelty. And then something happened that wasn't on Eleanor's schedule. From a quiet table in the far corner of the ballroom, a place most guests had ignored, an elderly man stood up. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored gray suit that was utterly unremarkable. His hair was white, his face etched with the kind of lines that speak of a long and thoughtful life. He had been there all evening, watching silently. With a calm that felt almost unnerving in the tense room, he began to walk toward the Caldwell's table. His steps were quiet, but in the dead silence, they seemed to echo off the marble floor. He stopped beside Anna and placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then, he turned to the stunned Eleanor Caldwell. His voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority. "Pardon the interruption, Mrs. Caldwell," he said politely, "but I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Eleanor looked him up and down, unimpressed. "And who are you?" "There is no misunderstanding. This girl is incompetent, and I have just fired her." The old man offered a faint, almost sad smile. He ignored her question and looked at Anna, his entire expression softening with an overwhelming affection. "Anna, my dear," he said, "I told you to take the night off. You shouldn't be working." The room held its breath. Eleanor's arrogant expression froze. Robert Caldwell was staring at the man, a flicker of dawning recognition, and then terror, in his eyes. He had just realized who this was. This was James Harrison, the legendary press-shy billionaire, the man who owned an empire that included the very hotel they were standing in. Eleanor, still oblivious, scoffed. "Your dear? What is this nonsense? Who are you to dare?" James Harrison cut her off, his voice now as cold and hard as steel. "I am James Harrison, and this incompetent girl, as you so elegantly put it, is my granddaughter, Anna Harrison, my sole heir." In that moment, you could have heard a pin drop. Eleanor Caldwell's mouth fell open. She physically staggered backward and collapsed into her chair, her face, which had been red with rage, now the color of ash. She hadn't just insulted a waitress. She had publicly humiliated the heiress to one of the country's largest fortunes. James Harrison gave them no time to recover. He explained that his granddaughter had been working jobs like this for years. Anna never wanted to live in a bubble of privilege, he said, his voice ringing with pride. She wanted to understand the value of a hard day's work, to see the world through her own eyes, not from behind the walls of an estate. His gaze then shifted to Robert Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell," Harrison continued, his voice dangerously quiet, "if I recall, you and I signed a contract just last week, a rather significant investment on my part to save your company from impending bankruptcy. Is that correct?" Robert Caldwell could only nod, mute with fear. "Well," Harrison said, "consider that contract terminated. I don't do business with people who lack basic human decency." That was the kill shot. Everything Eleanor had been trying to project that night, power, status, perfection, was gone. She began to sob, ugly, gasping cries of a woman who had just lost everything. The bride, Olivia, stared at her mother with pure hatred. "How could you?" she whispered. "You've ruined us." Anna stood in the middle of the wreckage. She had never wanted this. And as she looked at the weeping, broken woman in front of her, she felt not a sense of victory, but a profound pang of pity. With a quiet resolve, she stepped in front of her grandfather. "Grandfather, please," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Don't do this." He looked at her, surprised. "Anna, these people humiliated you. And for that, their whole family should pay," she interrupted gently. "To have their lives ruined over one person's mistake? That's not justice. Grandfather, that isn't who we are." She then turned to Eleanor Caldwell, and in her eyes there was no malice, only a startling compassion. In that moment, she held their entire world in her hands. She could have let it shatter, but she chose to hold it together. James Harrison watched his granddaughter, and his eyes filled with an immense, unwavering pride. "You're right, my child." He turned back to the Caldwells. "My granddaughter has just given all of us a lesson in grace. For her sake, and hers alone, I will reconsider. But on one condition. I demand a sincere, public apology to the young woman you shamed in front of this entire room." Utterly broken, Eleanor Caldwell struggled to her feet. She stumbled over to Anna. Head bowed, she stammered. I am sorry. What I said, it was unforgivable. Please forgive me." Anna simply nodded. "I accept your apology." James Harrison stepped forward once more. "The business contract stands," he announced, "with one new clause. A significant percentage of all future profits will be permanently redirected to a new charitable foundation that provides scholarships for underprivileged students. A foundation which my granddaughter, Anna, will be in charge of." Anna hadn't just saved a family. She had turned a moment of ugliness into an opportunity for profound good. She had shown everyone what real power looks like. Not the ability to crush others, but the strength to lift them up. The wedding continued, but the atmosphere in the room had changed forever. A lesson had been taught, not by a billionaire's threat, but by a young woman's quiet grace. She had reminded everyone that you should never, ever judge a person by the uniform they wear, because you never know when you might be talking to royalty. If this story reminds you that true class is about kindness, not cash, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real-life stories where decency wins the day. And always remember, the most powerful people in any room are often the ones who don't need to prove it.